Trident Wargaming. Build it, paint it, play it.
Welcome, everybody, back to another wonderful Trident Codex review. Tonight, I am being joined by local legend, Kieren. Many of you will recognize him from his time many years ago, I know, working for Games Workshop for a number of years, or from the local competitive tournament scene, from some of the calendars that he models for. There's a million different places you might have run into Kieren. He's going to be joining me tonight because he is an expert in all things Adeptus Mechanicus, which is the codex we are doing today. So this time you guys don't have to listen to me prattle on for an hour by myself. I will take breaths, I will take breaks, and you guys will be able to hear from somebody who actually has played quite a bit of AdMech this edition.
Yeah, I'm at like 60 games.
Holy shit, that was way more than I thought.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
I was expecting like 20 or 30, and I already thought that was a lot, because let's be honest, AdMech have not been a super popular army so far this edition. We will get into that a little bit, obviously. But we will be following our usual format. We'll be covering off all of their detachments, all 5 of them. Today, and we'll obviously be getting into kind of the meat and the potatoes of what's good where, what, is maybe just on the cusp of being good, and maybe is just one little data slate away from being something that you guys might see a bit more of, or popping up more in your meta, and what could probably be forgotten about for the next little while, at least from a competitive standpoint. Of course, there's always room in our hearts for lots of things that don't always have great rules. But in any case, first off, before we get too deep into that, just want to touch base a little bit about AdMech in general. Obviously, they do get their codex in
December, end of November. It was in there.
Yeah, it was right around there, same time as Necrons. AdMech, I feel like, maybe I'm not the only person who does this. So you guys who are listening today, you guys tell me, respond in the comments here how you guys see this. I've always looked at codexes as falling into one of two groups. There's GW's main line of books, and there's GW's line of books, which they keep updated, but do they really care about them? And I know everybody will feel like that's their codex, and don't get me wrong, that's a perfectly natural thing. But there are a couple of books which I feel like, from a design standpoint, there is so much consistency, edition in and edition out, that that's GW's bread and butter. And then there's a bunch more that it's like they do it because they got models for it, and they got people who are passionate about producing this stuff, but it's an extra. Have you felt that way, Kieren?
Yeah, I mean, there's also just the model release cycle too, right? I mean, we got that Custodes spoiler for the Shield Captain. It's one model. It's a codex.
Yep.
Now, GW loves that codex. It's going to be a good codex, I think.
I think so too.
But it's definitely not going to have a lot of change compared to what people are used to seeing Custodes play and form like. So I get what you're saying. I would separate into 3 tiers. I think there's the tier they're changing. There's the tier they like, and they're maintaining it, but keeping it there. Mm-hmm. And then there's codexes that feel lost. And maybe this is one of them. I don't know. I've had a lot of fun with it, but there's definitely some things that make you go, ooh, that's an idea.
And it's funny because I actually don't feel like I feel like when I say that they're, separated into these tiers that GW maybe cares a little bit more or less about, I specifically need to mention that doesn't always reflect on the actual power of the book. There are books that have been competitively very, very viable, or maybe even too viable, that are in that box of armies that I don't think that GW cares that much about. But it's funny because I think that almost happens by accident sometimes. We've had that with AdMech in the past. We've had it happen with Drukhari, who I would also put in that kind of box, with Genestealer cults. And that's not to say that the mainline armies aren't ever too strong or whatever. Sometimes they are, but they are armies that armies you always know more or less what you're going to get, like Space Marines, like Eldar, like CSM, like Orcs, Tyranids. All these books that it's like, yeah, even before you see the book, you know what's going to be in it, with some new stuff each edition. And then there's armies that they just don't have as much identity, and AdMech's, I feel like, really one of those, because you just really never do know what way the book is going to pull, because GW has yet to fully define what AdMech is. That's my biggest actual complaint about AdMech right now, is the identity that I personally have ascribed to AdMech for the past 2-3 editions is not really what they are now.
Yeah, and there's so much opportunity with the detachment system too.
Yeah.
I come from games where you could play sub-factions and feel very good about your army, and it would have a coherent theme. And detachments seem to fit that to a T. So it's so close.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I'm sitting I have 30 Electro Priests behind me, just waiting to be built. That's a theme.
Yeah,
There's a strong
absolutely.
image to how that detachment should work, which we'll
Yep.
get into.
Yes, we will.
Yeah.
Okay.
But tying it all together.
Yeah, maybe like I said, that's something maybe we cover off as we go down the line here. But yeah, we'll dive into the detachments. We're actually going to start off with the Radzone Corps, which is the detachment which technically we should, especially as non-AdMech players, should probably be the most familiar with, because it's the one that's been around since the start of 10th. That you probably didn't see a whole lot of people play, because it had some problems. The general gist of a Radzone Corps is that there were the detachment itself. I think the general consensus, and again, I am a longtime AdMech player, but I have not played them much this edition. I think the general consensus is that this detachment is better overall in this book than its previous version, but I know that the rule itself, I think, is worse, like the detachment rule, than it was previous.
Man, we're already starting this off somewhat contrarian. I played a lot of games with the Index detachment, which is this detachment before the Codex. I think this detachment plays in a more interesting style than the Index, but I actually think it's worse.
You do.
And the main thing has to do with the stratagems, and the lack of one stratagem in particular, the shoot back stratagem. They changed the detachment rule to be a little bit more friendly, let's say. There's a little bit more oomph to it. I can honestly say the detachment rule did nothing, and I played a lot of games with this Index detachment. This is one where I got it's like 15 to 20 games of this. It did nothing 99% of the time. And there was a couple games where I could shoot a target that couldn't Armor of Contempt, because my opponent made the mistake of choosing to be battle shocked instead of taking a chance at D3 mortals. Now they've changed the rule. The forcing battle shock is neat. I played one game where I tried to really tune into the battle shock. I had some assassins. I had the one that does the little Shadow of the Warp bubble.
Yep, the Colexus.
I had 30 infiltrators. And you just ran around telling people, all right, it's the fight phase, you're engaged, take a battle shock test at -1 to 3. Maybe 4 if they were a psyker, which didn't happen in the times I tried it. But that's neat.
Yep.
But just like a lot of battle shock rules, it's in your turn. So it helps you score secondaries, turns off stratagems. But beyond that, I mean, you really want it to be more like NIDS.
Yep.
You really want it to be like that lovely Neurothroat.
Yeah.
Who can say at the start of your turn, Scotty, take a bunch of battle shocks at minus and give it a go.
Well,
but it doesn't do that. So.
And that was a discussion even before this book came out, where a lot of folks felt like literally just changing the timing would have been enough to make it not necessarily OP or anything, but certainly useful to swap it to the start of your opponent's command phase.
Yeah, and that's where this one, they made one change to the detachment rule that's actually quite impactful. So in the Index, it was start of every round, regardless of who went first, and obviously start of the battle for the first piece.
Yeah.
Now it's start of your command phase from turns 2 onwards.
Yep.
Which they added the battle shock potential, and then made the timing far less relevant.
Yep.
Now, if it would start a battle round, you would still be hoping that you went second every game. But yeah, it's so close.
Well,
it's so close to actually being really neat. He's battle shocking at -2 in the fight phase, having some snipers to make some extra tests. Maybe it's an assassin. Like, stuff's gonna fail. Even stuff with leadership 5 or 6, it's gonna fail when it's testing at an 8 or 9, 2 or 3 times in the phase.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's really neat. There's a theme there.
There is. There's something you can play with. Yeah.
But
I think that's actually, I'm going to mention that because I want to see how much it comes up as we go through this. My experience playing against you and the games I have played with AdMech was that they, not necessarily regardless of detachment, but in many of the detachments, many of the builds they want, many of the things they lean into, they're one of the, I think, relatively few armies that actually do want to go second quite often, was my experience. Which was not always the case, not the case very often at all for most armies, at least through the first couple months of this edition.
I would agree with you if you're running breachers. I think for me, there's been a very hard divide in how I play AdMech, which will come out as we talk about the detachments. And it's either how many, am I running 12 breachers or more? Or am I running 6? Or am I running none? And I know running none sounds kind of nutty, but there's plenty of lists that can run none, I think, and do well.
We've talked about it.
The lists that don't run breachers, give me first turn all the time. Because I'm playing an archetype, I'm playing board control.
Yep.
I want to go first and force things, especially with infiltrators and scouts and things like that. But if you have breachers, there's so many things that prey on Terminator bodies nowadays. You really do need to be able to get that first strike with your giant. Are they 60 mil, 50 mil, 60 mil base?
They're 60s, yeah.
60s.
Like insane, but they're 60s, yeah. 60 mil base.
You want to try and get that first strike with your speed 5, 60 mil base models.
Yeah.
And going second helps a lot with that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very hard line there in terms of what I want to do for first or second.
That's kind of also going to be another interesting thing. We kind of have to address that elephant in the room before we can even really, it's going to come up in every detachment basically, is breachers. Because it's so interesting, and actually a few people I saw on the internet, on Reddit or whatever, have been talking about maybe GW in this most recent Data Slate article that they put up, or a MetaWatch article, did mention that, they felt like there were some units that maybe weren't performing as they wanted them to. And it was just like, you've got to feel like there's probably half a dozen or more AdMech units that aren't performing how they want them to, because everybody knows when it comes to AdMech, there is exactly one unit in the entire army that realistically is an offensive threat. Now, there are other units that situationally are, absolutely, but like you mentioned, so often with AdMech, they end up being kind of forced into a board control box, because no matter what detachment you're playing, that's like what you can do. The army can be fast, the army can be durable, the army cannot be offensive all that much without a reasonable complement of breachers.
Yeah, and there's ways you can kind of get around that lethality and still feel like you can kill things. Like, I think this is the last one we'll get into, but the Cybernetica detachment.
Yes.
Like, there's tanks.
There are.
Ballistari are great. Dragoons are great.
Yep.
I even enjoyed the lottery casino gun of the sustained hits D3, rerolling all hits and wounds. There's fun things that can pop off. Scotty, our game at that tournament, where you just watched my dice fizzle that first shooting phase, that is the issue. It's consistency with that lethality, and that's what breachers bring. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely agree on those that elephant in the room. So
well, I wanted to mention it because it is a thing. I know some people listening will, as Kieren mentioned, find it crazy to suggest playing no breachers. But the reality is that Will's breachers are very good, and they do not just good for AdMech, they do good damage, period, as far as this game is concerned. Ultimately, they're kind of the thing that does. And so in AdMech, regardless of the detachment, so much of what you do, even if you're using completely different units, is going to follow a pretty similar archetype, which actually unfortunately ends up bottlenecking AdMech competitively a little bit, because it means there's basically always going to be one, maybe two right ways to play them, no matter how many detachments you have, because the detachments, even though they're supposed to be thematically different, don't convert to that. They don't translate to that on the tabletop. But anyway, before we swing way too far off, we should talk about Rad Zone and how it works with that. As you mentioned, you played. You've actually, of your 60 games, it's probably mostly been Rad Zone, eh?
A third, right?
Yeah.
So 15 to 20 pre-index, and then I've only played 2 games with them post-index, or in the Codex version. And really, there I tried one game where I pushed hard into that Battle Shock tech, just to see the timings. And frankly, the issue was just timing of Battle Shocking, and I Battle Shocked a lot. But it just, either you're not playing an army where the stratagems are super defensive and impactful on their turn, or it's not helping you score primaries, and you have no issues scoring secondaries if you're playing board control.
Yeah.
So this detachment is interesting because it is one of the ones that runs, in my opinion, a single unit of breachers extremely well.
Yeah.
Because you give them that sustained hits 1.
Yep.
You have access to lethal hits if you're not running a Manipulus. So if you run a Dominus, just because if your meta's full of damage 3 guns, maybe that's an issue.
Maybe.
And the strats aren't terrible. The splashing strats are interesting.
Yeah, so let's touch on that a bit, because I do like to kind of not fully read out, but certainly recap some of the rules here for the listeners. So 6 strats as always. This detachment's kind of interesting in that it is not technically a Skitarii focused, or shouldn't be a Skitarii focused detachment, but it kind of is, because in the new book, all but one of the strats have this little rider on them where if you target a battle line unit, which are only Skitarii within this book, then you can splash the strat to another Skitarii unit within 6 inches. So it is leaning into Skitarii units fairly hard. And honestly, with the splashing, if some of those Skitarii units had a little bit better output or a little bit better tricks, I could see this actually being quite strong. So there are 2 strats, both 2 CP, that are defensive focused. One is for a 4+ invul, and one is for -1 to wound in combat. And there's 4 single CP strats, one for lethal hits that can target literally any AdMech unit, one for getting a getting a 6-inch automatic 6-inch advance. We have one for getting rerolls to hit, which is actually pretty strong in AdMech because there's some units who desperately want it. But you do have to target a unit within your opponent's deployment zone. And then there is a hilariously off-kilter one where you target an objective, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, this one.
For the mortal wound and a battle shock, right? For anybody on that objective.
I secretly love this one. But it does more of the same. Yeah, forcing battle shocks on people's cute when you're playing Scorched Earth.
Yeah.
And you can prevent them from,
to try to break up like an action.
A little orbital,
And this is actually...
4 up, so, complete lottery.
This is actually true of more than a few actions, too, because also, it's not always going to line up, but there's a lot of times where a unit might be on an objective in the middle of the table trying to deploy teleport homers, that you could try to do this to break up the action.
Yeah, this wouldn't stop it, because deploy homers concludes at the end of your turn. This is only in your command phase.
This is only in your own command phase. This is correct.
Timing, Scotty.
Very sad.
Timing
is with battle shock specifically, which is kind of the nature of it, right?
In any command phase, I would actually probably use this a lot.
Yeah, as it is,
to play into what the army does. Right?
I wouldn't, just because. Here's the thing about it that is also an issue with this stratagem is you target an objective and you do get to roll for every unit on that objective, however many they may be, but it is only on a 4+. So it's a 50-50 chance to do, I think, just one mortal wound. Yeah, one mortal wound.
Yeah, it's just the
and
test.
then force a battle shock, which of course could easily be passed, but you are trying to combo with other stuff. And then at a timing where unless you're really worried about them getting off a key defensive strat, you don't really care about that battle shock. And that's true of even the detachment ability itself that forces battle shocks and mortal wounds at completely irrelevant times.
This one's interesting because I see this as kind of the competitor to the next detachment that we talk about, the Skitarii Hunter cohort, because it does run Skitarii well.
Yep.
It plays the board position game well with that auto 6-inch advance. Jumping out of a transport, advancing 6 automatic, you're throwing Skitarii 15 inches up the board.
Yep.
From a transport that potentially scouted.
Yep.
Next to a unit of Dragoons.
Yep.
That's really neat.
Well,
if that's your first turn of just shoving models up the board,
Mhm.
that's a great strat.
Well, and
You know,
this
two
book
auto
does it well.
events, like it does it well.
Yep.
The lethal hits I think plays into certain matchups very well. One of the things I didn't do in any of the 2 games I've played with this one since Codex, but yeah, here's my 50 shots from 10 infiltrators just shooting their little space Uzis at a Catan.
Yeah.
I'll take lethal hits. Are you
I
in your
mean,
deployment zone? Maybe I'll take reroll to hit.
yeah. You could
That's
do,
neat. Cute.
three-ish wounds to a Catan with that. So, which I don't even say that like in like a bereaved sort of way. That actually, to be honest with you, there's a lot of units in this game that would pay good money to do 3 wounds to a Catan. So, it's not an easy thing to do. No, I agree. And like the as you mentioned, the enhancements, like they do have that incredibly important sustained hits enhancement, which of course gets comboed very well with breachers. Anytime you have that kind of combo, you do have to think about it. There is also, I do like the stealth enhancement as well. I think the problem with it is that, of course, as you mentioned, there is competition elsewhere in this book for getting that sort of thing. But it is like genuinely stealth is a good rule, and this army does want it. It is a rule that combos well with the whole board control idea. So there is that. There is obviously a very heavily nerfed enhancement to enhance what was almost certainly going to be a Dominus to give them anti-infantry 2+, and comboing for dead wounds. Unfortunately, it doesn't work quite as well anymore because it doesn't give you an extra 3 shots, which it used to.
I just won some games off that. Like just a couple times where I even did it off of Dominus where I stuck him in a squad of breachers and at Overwatch and people be like, but you hit on 6s. And I'd be like, yeah, sure. Like I'm re-rolling.
Yep. But it's also here's the funny thing. It was part of the GW double L, as I always say, that dev wounds got weaker, got nerfed, and then of course they nerfed this as well. So, what are your thoughts? Okay, actually, I already know your thoughts, but what are your thoughts on the new enhancement that Radzone got?
I love it. I think it's super fun.
Yeah.
In the one thing I wish they did. So I actually wish the extra. I don't know how much you'd cost this. The issue is this would become an instant take enhancement. I wish it extended the range of the army rule. By that 6 inches as well. So it's very neat, right? So for context for the audience, it increases essentially the zone for the radiation bombardment from your opponent's deployment zone by 6 inches.
Yes.
And the army rule, the aggressor doctrine, triggers off enemy deployment zone.
Yes.
So it's kind of weird. I know when I was playing Isaac with this, we were doing this. Okay, so I'm in the zone for this, and I went, you are for this, but not for this.
Yeah.
And it would have been really nice if it was one zone, because we found ourselves tracking 2 different lines on the battlefield.
That actually makes sense to me, though, purely because AdMech has a long history. This isn't even just 10th or 9th or 8th. AdMech has a long, long history of being extremely obscure to opponents rules-wise, where you basically just had to take the AdMech player's word that that's how their rules worked, because there were so many rules that didn't make sense or didn't show up elsewhere in the game or changed so very much from unit to unit or game to game that really it blows my mind to know that some of the most famous cheaters in Warhammer didn't play AdMech.
It is like the epitome of playing this weird Byzantinian monstrosity of a bureaucracy, which is very thematic.
Yeah, it is.
So actually, point taken on that. Let's track multiple deployment zones. That sounds
like
great.
Why not, right? And it's just
why
like,
not? Yeah,
that doesn't make sense.
I should get lasers that just sit by the table and draw a line.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, but it is what it is. So, I suppose actually, and this was my bad. We probably should have covered this off right at the start. But to be fair, anybody who's here 15 or whatever minutes into this probably is less worried about it. But yeah, the Adeptus Mechanicus army rule, of course, we have the Aggressor and Conqueror doctrines. Just to cover that off real quick, the Aggressor doctrine, you pick one of these every turn for your army to have, or each battle round for your army to have. One of them gives all of your weapons assault, the Aggressor doctrine, and also gives you an extra AP when targeting enemy units that are at least partially within their own deployment zone. Conqueror gives you all your weapons heavy, and then also gives you functionally Armor of Contempt, -1 to enemy AP, as long as your unit is partially within your deployment zone. The reason why that matters a lot is that those do combo very specifically with some of these detachments super well, and defines how AdMech plays. So,
and I'm gonna add one thing there. The AP bonuses or negation is ranged only. I definitely think that's a bit of a miss for an army
really
rule.
Functionally, all of these rules are ranged only, right? The other ones just by the nature of what they are. But the AP bonuses specify range, and then of course assault and heavy are only ranged abilities, despite the fact that, yeah, as you said, a lot of useful units over the life of this army have been melee ones who functionally get no army rule whatsoever. All right. We've dwelled on Rad Zone long enough. Let's talk about the one of, I think, the probably 2-ish detachments in here that in the book that are truly considered to be reasonably competitive, even though I know you feel that pretty much all of them are to one extent or another, and I agree. But
depends
this is
on the
one
size of your wallet and how many basement renovations you've done.
Yeah, that's I think that's a fair comment. Okay, Skitarii Hunter Cohort. Kind of the bugbear of AdMech right now, probably because I think in a lot of ways it's the one that leans the hardest into board control as an archetype. It may not even necessarily do it the best, but I feel like when I read Skitarii Hunter Cohort, it feels to me like that's the idea.
Yeah, it's very clear what they're asking you to do as the player here.
Yes.
Enjoy stealth. On a bunch of your Skitarii models that are cheap and take up lots of board position.
Yep.
Use Sicarian models.
Yep.
They might get cover too when they're sitting in the open, screening someone or blocking some movement. Sure.
Yep.
Right.
Lots of movement tricks, some survivability tricks, and just the nature of Skitarii units in general right now, especially after a couple data slates where costs have come down a bit. You're generally getting, actually with AdMech in general, I feel like your cost for survivability on most units is quite good. Most units are cheap for the body that you put on the table. They don't necessarily do a lot, but they're tanky enough for their cost, and this, between them, their natural movement and this detachment's abilities, getting around the table is easier than ever.
Yeah. And this is where I think, this detachment in particular kind of gets around that lethality question just by presenting the stuff that does do damage. You will basically max out how much of that you have. Like wallet size depending, you will have 9 Dragoons. They're good.
Yeah,
they hit well.
They are good.
Sometimes
honestly,
they completely whiff and you get 2 hits and you cry as your opponent rolls 2 4-up invulns when they're safe.
Or
and
you just don't roll enough sixes.
Something and murder it. Like I've had a unit of Dragoons just pick up a custode squad.
Yeah.
That's kind of nutty.
Yeah,
right?
It is.
Same thing with Balistari, and you'll have 9 of them.
And
yeah, they hit on 4s,
60...
but they are sustained hits, 1 twin linked last cannons.
Yeah.
With potentially extra AP.
Yeah.
If you're a tank in your backfield, like that's scary.
Yeah, and 50 points a model, right? Like so. And again, I cannot also point it out can point it out for sure that like these models, again, they are not durable in the literal sense of the word. That's the rock hard, most difficult thing in the game to kill. But for their cost, they are durable. 2/7, 7 wounds, got an invul. Like, they're.
Whenever I find myself looking at another army for a bit of a palate cleanser for AdMech, whenever I hit the character section, I always have this weird moment of looking at like a Gene Stealer character that's 55 points or 60 points. And I'm like, toughness 3, 3 wounds, 5-up armor, does a bit of damage.
Yep. Or
my Balistari's
a Dragoon, yeah.
Or like a Dragoon's probably the better, or a 60-point model that gets good in combat, fallback charge,
T7, 7 wounds, invul, stealth.
This is if they put a character tag on these models, I wouldn't be able to take this many because you just give up. Well, you kind of give up a lot of secondaries, anyways. But
yeah,
it's pretty nice.
Yep,
it's pretty nice. So. Yeah, and I mean this detachment in particular. I think the enhancements in this detachment are great.
Yes, one of the maximum selling points. Yeah,
I think the cost on these is actually when I was making lists for Hunter Core, there's quite a few times where I looked at it and I went, I'm in that 100 to 120 point range left of points to fill out the list, and I have something like Battlesphere uplink in there, and I add another Skitarii squad, I got like 30 or 40 points left, and I'm like, I can't do anything with really useful with this. Oh, but if I cut this, it's like a whole other squad.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit expensive. Like you have to have a plan for what you're doing with them. But they're great.
Yeah, it guts with Skitarii in general because they're so cheap. I think you definitely also get a little bit of that issue where there's so many 50, 60, 80 point squads that you could possibly have that if you spend 80 points on enhancements, even if they are really good, you're like, wow, look at how many more models I could have though, right? Whereas in some armies, it's like you can only get a custode for a custode squad for 160 points, so you don't really fret about it.
Yeah, it's the thing like trying to make tiered lists where you're like, I can put in a Ripper.
Yep.
You look at your enhancements a little bit more hard.
Yep.
Like, whereas in lists where the lowest point is that 90, 100, you don't. Sometimes you just sit there and you go, I've got 2 good enhancements, I'll take them. It's not worth trying to take 3 good squads down to make 4 okay-ish squads, right?
Yes.
Whereas in this book, that's the question that comes up a lot, right?
Because sometimes just having more models is better.
Yeah. And I do think, if you really just lean into that playstyle of board control, like, infiltrators are really good.
Yes.
I'm super happy about infiltrators. Vanguard are really good.
Yeah.
Rangers with that scout move are really good. Dragoons.
Well, yeah.
Sorry.
See what
they're all good, right?
When you think about it,
the only thing I haven't done is run 30 cavalry models too.
I can do 18.
You can do 18. And I honestly don't think cav are bad in this. So what I like about this detachment is there's actually a lot of the range that you can use effectively.
More so than some, yes.
More so than some, because there's a lot of Skitarii models, and they're all actually, when you take out the need to do damage, and you add a bit of survivability, and that 5-up feel no pain strat, it's good on Dragoons and Battlestar, obviously. It's pretty good on 10 Marine equivalents.
I was gonna say if you're taking 10-man squads, it's
with
good.
Stealth, maybe cover if they're Sicarians.
Yeah.
Like forcing battle shocks in your opponents at the start of the fight phase at -2 because you're gonna have battle line near you.
Yep.
So they can't use any like aggressive strats that they might have had to punch through. Like,
Yep.
That 140 point unit's actually quite tanky.
So
yeah.
Let's because I want to talk about a few of the little combos here. Let's quickly I'm going to quickly run through some of the rules here that are most relevant. Of course, the detachment ability of Skitarii Hunter Cohort, which is just that your Skitarii units are going to have stealth, whatever they might be. Anything that's got that keyword, it's got stealth. Wicked good rule. Additionally, the Sicarian units, if they're more than 12 inches away from an enemy, are going to have cover no matter what. This is, quite frankly, not a super handy ability, but it's nice when you get it. You probably want to hide anyway, though, but it's nice. This detachment has one hilarious, what is assumed to be a typo, which is that all 6 stratagems in it are strategic ploys, despite the fact that some of them don't seem like strategic ploys. It doesn't matter. AdMech's not an army that has cost reduction or whatever when it comes to CPs or stratagems, although it does insulate you from having any of your stratagems vected.
Yeah,
so there's that.
If things like Wargear strats mattered more, like the 5-up feel no pain bionic endurance is 100% like a Wargear-ish thing.
Yeah, or like a battle tag. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I really love it. I actually thought it was super memey in the Codex at first, and
it's neat.
I fall in love with it. Like Cybernetica, it's all like at the start of your command phase for all this. Like there's things like that I actually loved about this Codex.
Yeah, well, it is neat. It's just somewhat.
It brought me joy, and sometimes in a Codex, that's all you need. A little bit of joy to inspire some fun ideas. But
4 strats, yeah. Like, we do have a couple that are very powerful defensive abilities. Again, kind of leaning into, I think, some of the strengths of AdMech in general. As Kieren mentioned, so these are all 1 CP. There's a 5+ Feel No Pain strat. This can be used on Taraxi, Sidonian, or Sicarian units. That's basically all your 2 wound models plus your big, scary Sidonian Dragoons. I guess not the cavalry, but you get the idea.
Not the cavalry.
You do have Shroud Protocol, which can be used on any Skitarii infantry. This is a lone op strat, which are always amazingly good. You have a Deep Strike or Arrive from Reserve within 3 inches strat. Again, always spectacularly good stratagem, especially as we will cover a little bit here in combo with some movement abilities. We then have a very strong strat, but kind of a tricksy one because of the typing. You can get +1 to wound on wind and shooting, I think it is, right? Yeah, you can get +1 to wound, yeah. Which is
+1 to wound against things that are basically isolated from their
so
allies.
If they're more than 6 inches from an enemy or from another enemy unit, this is a very strong. Not the issue I have with it is not actually the 6 inch, because there actually are quite often a target that you can find that's more than 6 from somebody. The issue I have with it is that it's literally locked to Sicarians, Taraxi, Sidonian, Iron Strider, and Skitarii mounted units, which I know sounds like a lot, but like realistically, the shooting output of a lot of those is not something that you're going to blow this CP on.
It covers 1 unit. That's really important.
Yeah, well, the Sicarians, I would say. The
Battlestar.
Well, yeah, I guess.
Attracting.
Well, yeah, I mean, a squad of 10 infiltrators would be what I would almost think.
So, these once again. The issue with most of these units is they hit on 4s.
Yeah, I know.
The Flamer unit now gets 3 rolls to wound.
It does. And
so if you're rolling
that,
10d6 Flamers with full rerolls to wound, with +1 to wound.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, I can see what you're saying. I think, like, mathematically, their output will be pretty close. Actually, I do think that the Flamers are going to pull ahead. But the thing about it is just you're getting, on average, 3.5 hits, whereas if you have 5 shots, you know what I'm saying. But yeah, there are a couple units there that you're looking to go a +1 to wound, and you actually could do some damage even if it doesn't have AP and it's 1 damage, but it can work.
Lots of Satan killing stuff.
Yeah, like, literally, right?
Volume of dice against a 4 pinball, great.
There's actually a couple of kind of bully units in the game right now that are a little bit vulnerable to just massed 1 damage firepower. Like Catan, like Bulgrin, things like that, which AdMech are genuinely good at dealing with.
Yeah.
You do have an advance and charge strat, which would be awesome if the melee units in this book were a little better, but it's always nice to have. I have actually, when advance and charge was one of the strats for the Skitarii cohort from 9th edition, and I probably used that strat on Vanguard or Rangers more often than I used it on anybody else, because a lot of times you're just using it to get someone somewhere.
So I still think you will use that strat. I played 2 games with Hunter Cohort. Both were, in my opinion, extremely boring.
Yeah.
However, I actually used that strat twice in both games. And it was on Vanguard 3 out of those 4 times. And it was just to switch an objective primary-wise.
Exactly.
Knowing that, I'm going to have hopefully 1 or 2 Vanguard survive the attacks that are going their way. I'm using a Dragoon unit or a Battlestar unit to soak up most of the damage from an attack from the unit I'm charging.
Yep.
And the Vanguard just go ahead and tag the unit, say -1 OC.
Yep.
And my guy's OC2.
Yep.
And that's enough.
Yep.
Most of the time. So,
and that's...
there's a lot of neat things. I want to point out one thing about the detachment rule. It doesn't affect Skitarii tanks.
It does not. You have to be infantry.
Yeah.
Or mounted, or Iron Striders,
or Battlestar.
Yeah.
When I was first reading this, I went, ooh, neat. I actually want to take Dune Crawlers and do like bubbles of Skitarii, kind of almost like Star Wars Episode 2, Clone Wars, like Geonosis, like just walking up through the desert star. Like that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I don't need stealth. Oh, but suddenly I have a target, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So there's a couple things about this detachment that I think work particularly well. And once again, just like the Rad Zone detachment, infiltrators are extremely good. Like every list I made for those two detachments has started with 3 units of infiltrators, either 5-mans or more. But just being able to also pick 2 of those Sicarian units up at the end of the turn and re-enter them. Like there's speed 8 models that infiltrate.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a lot, right?
Well, and
they cover a lot of space. They're also 40 mil bases, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, really, like Sicarians, I think are obviously the best for that because you get to target 2. But a lot of people have made great use of the pick up your unit strat. Is also great with like Sky Stalkers or the Flamer Boys. Purifier.
It's really good with them.
Yeah.
If you're running the unit of 10 to take advantage of that +1 to wound,
yes,
I think that's definitely a unit. The issue for me is that that's taking up 2 CP.
Yeah.
Every turn, out of your potential 3, and you're also you're using bionic endurance basically once every turn. You can use it in both the shooting and fight phase, Scotty.
You can.
So I found I found myself going, these other strats are really neat.
Yeah.
But this is definitely one of those detachments where there's one strat that's really good.
Yeah.
That you were using twice.
Yeah.
Every turn, if your opponent is active in both phases, the shooting and fight phase. If they are, you're kind of doing that, and if they're active in the shooting phase, you're probably also lone opping something.
I was going to say, and you've got the lone op strat too.
I'm done. I guess that's it.
Yeah.
So, I think this detachment plays competitively quite well. It actually has some extremely good matchups and some extremely poor matchups.
Board control generally does.
I will say with the data slate and the just raw damage of Chaos Marines going down.
Yeah.
I do wonder if there's going to be more and more things that have that damage curbed.
Yeah.
And this detachment and this playstyle just gets better and better.
Yeah.
I actually don't think there's points drops needed to make this detachment work. I just think it's a meta question.
No.
Really.
I think in general with AdMech too, the reality is if you have an issue with them, it's not because of points. The points are fine. It's at some point you need to actually just change the rules. You can't just make things cheaper,
Yeah.
This strategy or this detachment is, of course, also very much enabled by its enhancements that we talked about. May or may not be worth it. One that is virtually always going to be worth it, so you should be watching out for, is the Veiled Hunter strat, which lets you redeploy, I believe it's 3 whole units, Skitarii infantry units, after seeing the first... Yeah, 3 infantry units, after seeing who's going first. Obviously, those enhancements are solid gold.
Yeah. Especially now that your infiltrators can re-infiltrate.
Yes.
And
the data
potentially
slate
scout.
Yeah.
So your unit that is led by Marshal, a Vanguard, that also gets infiltrate and scout 6.
Yeah.
Is going to redeploy probably.
Yes.
And if you're going first, like that unit just jams a quarter of the table.
Oh yeah.
Half a table and calls it a day.
Oh yeah.
For 140 points.
Yes.
Ish.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the thing too. Is of course, like I said, the other ones, the other 2 that I think are very worth it are that Scout 6 plus Infiltrate for 1 squad, which inevitably will be Vanguard or Rangers because it does have to go on a Marshal who can only join those, or the Move Shoot Move. Both of them I've seen both of them used competitively. They both absolutely have a place. It's the only thing with those is, as Kieren mentioned, sometimes you're looking at it like with 50 more points. What can I, but they are like, and the thing is they do so well with the archetype, right? Of just, I want to go first. I want to push your entire army in, like I want to lock it in your deployment zone, maybe even tighter than that. And then I want to spend the next 5 turns dying slower than you think I should. Mm-hmm. And when we're done, I'm going to have a lot of points to show for that.
So one thing about this detachment and the Rad Zone detachment, I think these two have a weird sub-theme that's actually quite good in this current meta. The issue is, 1, you need to own the models for it, and 2, you actually have to play around it. Yeah. But there's a precision subtype going on here that's actually quite neat.
Yep.
So all your Skitarii squads come with that Arquebus.
Yep.
Which, it's not a great gun. It's not a bad gun.
Yep.
Not a bad gun when you have 6.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
With all the infiltrating and scouting and like, okay, there's something there. And Stilts Buddy. We'll talk about Stilts Buddy at some point. I don't think Stilts Buddy's super great. I will say being able to get an advanced gun on a Speed 8 model that does have precision and loan op, I like, it's growing on me.
Yeah.
I played I played 2 games where I took 3, and I diffused them across the map. Wasn't super hot.
Mhm.
One game where I drove them around like a hunter pack. That was kind of neat. I had to be really careful with where I put them. The advanced rules obviously made everything kind of nonsense, but being able to poke three them around a corner and just kind of go ham on something was neat. And this detachment does that really well.
Yeah.
Because you're also kind of rewarded for taking the dragoons that have the sniper rifle too.
Yeah.
Just as a matter of filling the board with stealth vehicles that have precision.
Yep.
And there's lots of things in the game now that if you're gonna try and break through 18 plus chickens and 100 infantry models, you kind of might need your characters.
Yeah.
Like the ones that give sustained hits.
Well, and you don't have
that give you those extra rules that you need to deal with different threats, right?
Yeah. And you may not have the ability to waste shots in time trying to take out lone ops, even relatively fragile lone ops that are pestering you,
Yep.
So
lone ops with stealth too. So
Yeah. And an invul, so you never know, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think you're necessarily wrong. Is the key to the stilts man maybe that he should be able to be taken in groups of up to 3? I don't know. Tune in next week.
Oof. Hot take. I want a character unit of. I would actually run that. That'd be neat.
Like seriously, I would too. I honestly would do. Even at their current price point, I would buy them.
You know where they would be great? Being able to go to Rad Zone Core, and take the rerolls to hit in deployment zones.
Yeah. And well, that's what I was thinking is the reroll specifically, right? So.
And also in Hunter Cohort, one thing that's funny about the enhancement that gives Infiltrate in Scout 6, Scotty mentioned it's on a Marshal, and it goes on a Vanguard or Ranger unit. Yeah. It can also go
on a
Stilt Man.
On a Stilt Man. He is a character, yes.
Who gives himself Infiltrate, and it's not good.
No.
You're getting...
It does give him Scout. That's what you get. But
it's a weird,
It can be done. It can be done. I agree. It is a thing that could be done, as can the move shoot move. Can also go on him, which actually he might be a better target for it sometimes. So now the wheels are turning in my head about that. Anyway, whatever.
There's lots. There's lots of cute things.
Admech has always been a thinking man's army, so it's also been a rich man's army. So don't think too hard. But anyhow, okay, let's keep rolling. The next detachment we have, we're going to spend 45 seconds on. It's going to be a rapid run, just to make Kieren very mad. Yeah,
this is my favorite detachment.
To make him very mad. It's completely inconsequential detachment. We don't need to worry about it. Data Psalm Conclave. All right, moving on. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
So Data Psalm Conclave is kind of the opposite of Skitarii. Well, thematically, it's the Mechanicum detachment compared to Skitarii. It has its own, as you mentioned earlier, let's keep track of 2 things. This is like you have Doctrinas now, which is like the Aggressor and Conqueror imperatives. Now you get your own Mechanicum Doctrinas too, where I think it's every battle round. Are you choosing? Yeah.
No. So it's you pick at the start of the first battle round,
right.
And you have that till the end of the game.
Right.
So it's just a binary choice right off the hop.
That's a binary choice.
I know. I wanted to throw that in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's got a hexadecimal of stratagems, just like all the others. So, no, to roll back. So the detachment rule is you basically can have +1 AP if you're shooting at somebody within half range, or you can have +1 strength and attack when you charge, or is it all? No, it's when you charge.
When you charge.
In your experience, though, this is, Kieren, you would say that this is mostly a shooting army, though, yes?
No,
it's more of a combat one.
I've flipped. So okay. So at the start we talked about breachers, and obviously if you want to run a lot of breachers and just run 18 breachers, you can do that here. You can take the shooting piece. You can get AP 3 in half range, rapid firing, arc rifles. Very good. I don't think that's where the detachment's actually strongest. I think this is a detachment that actually plays into melee armies quite well that AdMech has, and it does so thanks to that strength and attack boost. That knock of extra strength does a lot more, in my opinion, than that extra AP does. So the only units that benefit from this detachment rule are the Cult Mechanicus units.
Yes.
And we'll get into this, but all the strats are Cult Mechanicus modules, not units. I think except for one. So what ends up happening is really, what are you getting extra AP on? It's just breachers, which is good. I've tried it once or twice. I don't think it's that great, but getting AP2 on the grav guns is cute. But AP1,
Yeah.
And then your electroshock gauntlet priests getting AP1 is cute, but once again, AP1 isn't the same it used to be. It's not.
No.
If they were getting AP2, okay, maybe.
That ignores cover, maybe, but
yeah, but you're basically just asking for a buff to breachers. In which case, I would point you to some of the other detachments that I think run breachers better, or at least to an equivalent degree. But if you go the combat route, you suddenly find yourself with 720 points of Electro Priests that go from either, like 30 of them are going from Strength 5 to Strength 6, and 30 of them are going from Strength 6 to 7.
Yep. It's the break points, right?
And it's 60 models getting extra attacks on the charge instead of, like, it's, memes, numbers, just calling this a math army aside. Like,
sure.
I do think it's a melee. I think it's a melee detachment. I think that's what it does. Especially as we talk about things in the team game kind of context.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a fun build here where you can throw this up against a World Eaters player and feel very confident.
Oh yeah,
which
absolutely.
Is not something AdMech would normally say to an army that can charge you turn 1.
I do think that, like, just from a design standpoint, a lot of AdMech armies are going to be strong against ultra aggressive melee armies, purely because of that what we talked about with just the level of aggression you can do yourself with expendable models, where you just if you go first, you can, and even if you don't, you can just push them back more. But yeah, this army can do it. Can still do all that. There's nothing stopping you from taking those units that can infiltrate. But then also can swing back. It's not just saying you have to chew through this in 5 turns. It's like, no, you have to chew through this, and frankly, you're going to lose a lot of stuff to me fighting you back.
And it does more than just die. There's also some very, like... So I've played this detachment 10 times, and you actually get a lot of mobility out of things like Heroic Intervention.
Yep.
I found myself using that regularly, which is
one of the few armies that does.
Just very different than my experience with a lot of shooting armies and shooting detachments, where you kind of forget that there's 10 core stratagems apart from maybe grenades.
Yeah.
Insane bravery and a reroll. And suddenly you're looking at all of them and saying, ooh, so this unit has fights first from an enhancement that I have.
Yes.
Where do I position it? How do I weave it in with my other units? I got my fight on death strat. Who am I using that on? Why am I using it? It presents a lot more choices that lets you control the fight phase in a way that the armies that are just presenting presenting bodies up the field, you can position.
Yeah.
This army lets you actually engage in the fight phase with your opponent.
And that is something that is clear from reading through kind of the enhancements and to some extent the stratagem and to some extent the enhancements as well. Like you're mentioning, is that there is quite a bit of support for melee. Like you mentioned, there is the fight on death. There is, and this is a big one actually that I hadn't even really looked at before. Again, this is not the type of army I would normally play. I'm not a Mechanicum guy.
+1 to wound.
But +1 to wound. When you combo that with the strength bonus, there are times where you are, of course, going to be looking at +2 to wound, which is a massive jump that your opponent absolutely can't necessarily be ready for until it's happened to them. So that's legit.
A +2 to wound from an infantry model against a tank that's toughness 12 or 11 or higher. Like, wow.
Yeah.
Right?
They were counting on 6s, now they're on 4s.
Now we win that Land Raider on 4s.
Yeah.
Now, Land Raider is probably a bad example because they're still only AP1.
Yes, but there's lots of models that
lets you crank
would
through
need
a lot.
to worry.
Yeah. And yeah. So I suppose we should talk about some enhancements first, because I think the enhancements are actually quite interesting here. So we talked about the fights first one. It needs to go on a tech priest. There's actually options for where you put this, which is one of the things that isn't necessarily as true in the others. A lot of them are, you put this on your Manipulus in Breachers, or you put this on a Marshal.
Yeah.
With this one, you can put it on any tech priest in a Breacher unit. Yeah. It's good. They swing old school Thunderhammers at strength 8, AP 2, damage 3.
Yep.
Strength 9. Yep. And they'll have 3 attacks instead of 2, re-rolling hit. Neat. You can throw this on the Cybernetica character. not Colt Mechanicus unit.
No.
But now you have robots with fight first.
Yep.
That's cute.
Yep.
You can also just throw this on any character you join to a unit of Fulgurite priests. And suddenly you have a 10-man infantry unit with fights first that, the characters, if you take the Dominus and the Manipulus, you're on a giant base. So you can position where the usual charging tactics to get around fights first that people can employ actually get kind of hard when you have a giant base model as like an anchor in your unit.
Oh yeah.
That units can go base to base with to get their attacks.
Yep.
And then you have that, there's just little tips there. There's things that work well with that fights first, and you have options on where you put it. I've used it in all 3 of those configurations. It's been good every time. The robots one was kind of hilarious because my opponent just went, I just can't charge them.
Yeah.
Because you still have 4. I haven't shot any down. You have twin linked fists.
Yeah.
What?
They hit quite hard. So
they hit quite hard, right? The other one I want to talk about is the minus. There's one that goes on a tech priest, and it's whenever they have damage allocated to them, it's reduced to 1.
Yeah.
Not super at 4 wound models. It's not like, oh wow, holy smokes.
Yeah.
But it's probably on a Dominus or Manipulus with a 2-up, 5-up, and 4 wounds.
Yeah, and on a Dominus, maybe a 5-up, feel no pain too.
Yeah, and if he's in Fulgurites, it's a 4-up, feel no pain.
Yeah, even better. Yeah.
And he's the one giving the unit -1 to wound. So if you have an opponent who's sitting there going, okay, all your characters give a lot of buffs, I want to strip them out of the units. I have ways to do so. I have snipers. I have characters that want to duel. You kind of sit there and you go, but not this one.
Yeah.
Really not this one.
Yeah.
And
this is funny because you play yourself with the precision army, and then it's like, haha. See, I see why you're trying to get people to do it.
Yeah. I'm trying to build my own meta here, right? Yeah, and then one of the other things about AdMech is there's only 2 ways to deal with battle shocking. If you are fighting into NIDs, one of them is run call, which we haven't talked about yet, and maybe this is the place to do so.
I just didn't want to.
Or you take this enhancement to give you leadership 6 as the best in the army.
Literally as good as it gets.
And the one-time no battle shock at the start of the phase.
Yes.
Which, with the stratagems that we'll get into, is actually quite good.
Yeah, no,
you have people who want to turn off fight on death.
Yeah.
And they shoot you with something in a shooting phase to get you battle shocked. This is neat. If you jump out of if your transport dies in the shooting phase and your unit gets exposed, being able to say, no, I can still fight on death is quite good.
Yes.
And it's a very cheap enhancement. I want to say it's 10 points.
Yeah, I think it's 10. The ability, this ability does pop up in a couple of books. It's not super common, and it doesn't get run very often. But I find that a lot of times in a lot of the books that have that ability to un-battle shock something are books where battle shock isn't a concern. Either because you're likely to pass it, or because the units that are likely to get battle shock just don't matter. AdMech is a little bit different than that, where you do have some units where you genuinely are really worried about that because you need them to be able to run strats, but also they have shitty leadership. This is a thing.
It's very much the case for these units. If Tech Priests were leadership 6, that would feel so much better.
Well, no doubt, right?
But sadly, they're not Necrons yet.
Yeah. Necrons is an example. You can say that. Yep. They do have leadership 6 on their characters. I'm still one of the saltiest people in the world that they are now a leadership weak army after 20 years of being a leadership strong one. But we don't need to hijack that conversation for my personal grievances. Okay, so just before we're wrapping them up, we will quickly touch on a few of those other strats that we didn't mention yet. As you mentioned, there is the fight on death, there is the +1 wound, there is a 4+ invulnerable save strat, which is actually done
4 invul in the shooting phase.
But it's also better than most because it is when targeted. So this is not a start of phase ability, so it's actually a very strong strat. We have,
and there's lots of synergy with that one, with the 3 Manipuluses you probably have.
That's true too.
Who have the start of phase 4 up invuln.
Yes.
So if you're running multiple breacher units, or if you have multiple units that are, you jumped 2 units out onto objectives, you have something you can do here, right? You can, you can say this one's gonna pop it, and then I'm gonna, if you target this one, I'll pop it.
Yeah. We have the very funny Electromancer one, which I'm sure you've used 2 to 3 times a game, every game, right? So this causes.
I want to.
This is you select a unit, a Cult Mechanicus unit. Every enemy within 6 inches has to basically take a check or suffer D3 mortal wounds. The check is a 5+. 4+ if the unit you targeted was Electro Priests, I believe.
Yeah, it's basically just like a deadly demise off your unit.
Yeah.
It's not bad. I actually think it's, once again, plays into certain kinds of armies extremely well. Yes. And MSU is on the rise.
That's true.
And
you never know. You never know.
I have one gripe with this, and it relates to a data sheet, not the stratagem.
Okay.
And it relates to a very good data sheet that they changed in probably a better way, that being the Dune Rider.
Yeah.
So they changed it from you could advance the transport and have the guys jump out and act normally, to to the very good rule of fire support, which goes very well with Jazz Hands, Electro Priests who shoot lasers.
Oh, yeah.
It would be really nice if I could advance the transport, jump guys out, and spill this just that little bit further, and still have that unit shoot. That's a pretty minor gripe. I feel like with this stratagem, I'm always a couple inches away from where I want to be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I want to catch 6 units, 7 units, 8 units. I don't want to catch 4 or 3.
Yeah.
And it's very army dependent, obviously. But it's very fun. And when it comes up, it's actually quite useful.
I do the thing about it is doing D3 mortals to each squad, which is functionally quite a lot. Like, that's a good result. The problem I have with it is, I have 2 problems. One, it will 5 up even. Like, you literally need Electro Priests because of how iffy this is. Like, you just are not going to risk this on anybody else. And even on Electro Priests, like, it's a coin flip, and I don't like those odds on. I don't like having coin flip odds on things I'm spending points on or command points on. My other gripe with it is that it doesn't also cause a Battle Shock chest, which would do nothing at all, because it clearly should do that.
Hey, if you're talking about a melee army, that having a way in the shooting phase to Battle Shock things you're about to charge would be amazing.
You never know. Now
you do have those in the book. They're just probably not taken here. And then the last one, very much the result of this Codex being printed probably before the data slate change of a 4-up feel no pain against mortals. Yes. That would be so good.
There was a time. It's not great now. Not something that, like, there's cases where you'd use it, but it very much is that's in the list.
I mean, this could just hard shut down armies if it was the old way.
Oh, like,
sure. Here's my 6 breachers with 4-ups.
Yep.
Good luck.
Yep. But pre-changes. So, like, honestly, for anybody out there listening, like, this is genuinely an interesting detachment to use, and I think this one is seeing a little bit of play competitively. People are leaning into
it very well.
No, it's not. But it's kind of like we talked about. There's been times where, like, something gets hyped and people say that could work. So, like, 30 Electro Priests with friends is a thing.
Yeah. I'm thoroughly behind this in a team tournament context.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thoroughly not behind this in a singles context.
Yeah.
Thanks to Arthur for the game I played against him with Tau, where it's shooting army.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I'd played this into a couple melee armies, and was like really like I was riding a good high here, and I played against a shooting army, and I went, this wasn't bad. Damn. I really wish transvectors were cheaper.
Yeah.
And I needed more Electro Priest models, so now I own more.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, like a really good detachment to melee armies. Definitely a very interesting meta pick. Fulgurates are great. Fulgurates with Dominuses are great. It plays into some things just extremely well. Like if I run into Ironstorm with a bunch of Dreadnoughts, this detachment is laughing its face off. You have your Dominuses doing the mortals on 4-ups, like just D6 mortals on a 4-up at the start of the fight phase. You're wounding them to our earlier point, potentially on 4s.
Yeah.
You have dev wounds on your attacks. You hit well. You have invulns yourself, so a Dreadnought punching you is not really that impactful. Picks up a couple guys and you thumbs up and move on. Like, it just does well into things that are not what I would expect AdMech to play well into.
Yeah.
And I think that's deserving of some praise that they came out with a detachment that is very different, has used very different units. And then there's a part that just will piss most people off, which is, okay, you have a cool detachment rule, you take a bunch of units that can use a detachment rule, and like 70 to 80% of those models don't get the army rule.
Yep. I want to mention this because actually I should have brought this up during Scudaria Hunter cohort, but I'm going to bring it up here because it's the last detachment where I think this is relevant. I know this is more of a melee detachment, like you've been saying, but in a hypothetical world where AdMech player's greatest wish comes true, and Dune Riders were open topped. Do you see that this detachment maybe then taking a jump up?
I would play this way more.
Because
and I've already played a lot. I would probably actually play this the most if that was the case.
Because
those
Jazz Hand party buses,
Jazz Hands, they're super fun.
Yeah.
Depending on how many breaches you're running, if you're doing 6 to 18,
yeah,
I would highly not recommend 0, but that's an option here too.
Yeah.
Your Manipulus models are going in the breachers probably as your first priority.
Yeah.
But if you're only running 1 unit of breachers and you have 2 units of Corpuscari with like shooting 30 sustained hits to lethal hits shots out of an open top transport, money.
Well, and it gives them,
and we're talking about this battle shock enhancement that helps you, like especially knowing that if someone pops your transport next turn,
yep,
you can still fight on death, or get +1 to wound, or for some reason if they do a bunch of mortal wounds, still have, like, that's really neat.
Yep.
I think there's something here. I also think the other thing that could change my opinion about this one, Scotty, is if transvectors drop 20 to 30 points, I will play 3 Dune Riders, 3 transvectors, 60 priests, some breachers, and characters.
My goodness.
That list suddenly is very interesting because this detachment loses the forward presence that all the others do, but you would still have that with transvectors. And then, the transvectors bring in the Fulgurates, drop them off in good spots.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, drop them off in spots where if you have the 2 CP, you have a good heroic with your fight's first unit protecting your other units.
It's just there's the Dune Rider actually is so good for so many AdMech units. If it were it's good anyway, but if it were open top, just
money.
This is
honorable mention to Belisarius Call here.
Sure.
This is the one place I've run him, and he's been okay.
Well, that's fair. Here's the thing.
But once again, I think this detachment's very vulnerable to being battle shocked because it's so reliant on those strats. His aura to rerolls, neat. Yes. His aura to reroll 1s to hit is much better on models that hit on 3s.
Yes.
And he himself actually has access to the detachment rule.
Yes.
And all of the strats. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, a lot of people actually, I don't have problems with Call. Most folks I know of, at least, just have a problem with his cost. His rules could be better, but they're fine. But yeah, he's a maybe take in this.
Hitting at strength 9's pretty cute.
Well, he does have things the rest of the army doesn't, including leadership 6.
Yeah,
but
I like this is your anti-battle shock AdMech army. You know,
okay.
I'm weird. I want to use this into NIDS one day. I haven't done that yet.
Well,
Anywho,
you should hit up Scott Fox.
I should.
Alrighty. Explorator Maniple. This is kind of the unwanted child of the book. Literally, like, I know you've played them all, right?
Yeah.
You might be one of like a very small number of AdMech players who have that achievement, played Explorator Maniple in a game, because the rules, even just reading through them, you start to really be like, WTF.
Brings me back to 9th edition in a way that I am both okay with and also extremely disappointed by.
Yeah. They're yeah.
We'll get into the issue with this one. But and you know what, maybe I'll preface the explanation of this detachment with this note. This very easily could have been the detachment that was played 90 to 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And it could have easily dominated everything else.
Yeah.
If it wasn't as convoluted as it was, and there weren't as many hoops.
Yeah, well, and that's, I think, when I talked to you about this a couple of weeks ago. That was my number one thing with the Explorator Maniple, is that every time you see something you're like, that's pretty good, there's just too many triggers that are required to be pulled to make it happen. Anyway, I'm going to quickly cover a few of the rules and then have some of your thoughts from your games. But just so that we can frame it, because this one, more than I think most, the chances are people don't know the rules very well about, because, yeah, they're not great. So the detachment rule is acquisition at any cost. Basically, every battle round, you're going to pick an objective. And then what's going to happen... it's at the start of your command phase. You pick an objective to be your acquisition marker. You're going to get a very good rule for that objective marker, and that rule is reroll wound rolls of 1. However, the trick is that either you or your target needs to be on the acquisition marker, which, like, is okay. And honestly, if that was comboing then with a bunch of other good rules, I think people wouldn't be too upset about it. But this is kind of the start of convolution in this set of rules. When we're looking at strats, we kind of jump all over the place a little bit. We do have a fairly good sticky objective stratagem. Always handy. But this one only stickies if you die on the objective, unlike a lot of other fairly good ones. Although, to be fair, at least this one is any phase. So there's that.
Yeah, it's reactive as opposed to planned, which isn't bad for units of cavalry.
Well, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, like, this is an army that does have small units whose job is just to die. So, you know. We do have a strat for increasing your consolidation move up to 6. But that's only to get you within range of your acquisition marker. Again, getting a 6-inch consolidate can be really good, but if it's only in the direction of one objective and can't even be used to help you get back into combat with something, not as good. We then have a strat for... Oh, I see. Sorry, this is actually one of the better ones.
This is, you use this every turn.
Yeah. This one allows you basically to select a second acquisition marker. Again, because the acquisition rule is actually decent, this is one of your CPs pretty much every turn, to give either a swath of your own army or a swath of the enemy army that reroll 1s to wound. We have a add 1 to wound roll stratagem, which happens in the shooting phase. Again, it can only be the enemy on an acquisition marker. But for what it's worth, reroll 1s plus 1 to wound is pretty good. Just that you do have to have gotten out of a transport this turn. Which actually is a little bit of counter synergy too, but you know, again, we did just talk about how much we do love this, but like, not only does that make it so that you have this unnecessary trigger, but of course it also does bottleneck the units you can actually use this on. You cannot use this on units that can't be in a transport, obviously.
I will say I haven't used this detachment since the data slate.
Yeah.
And the trans vector being able to drop guys off when it deep strikes.
Yeah. It does help for sure.
There's something, we're cooking.
Yeah, it's honestly, this is a detachment that you look for the silver linings. So absolutely. You have a strat to basically trigger the smoke from a vehicle and have it also drift off onto a second infantry unit, giving them stealth and benefits of cover. That's okay. It is locked to, a friendly unit within 6 inches, so
I would highly encourage people to read this as use on your breachers.
Yeah, basically, right? That's pretty much all you're ever going to use it on, so can you?
You can.
Yeah, you can.
So it's
Mechanicus infantry.
Mechanicus,
yes. I sometimes forget with breachers because they've bounced back and forth between whether they were
mounted. Were they mounted?
Or whatnot.
Bikers?
They were bikers, but they could breach back.
Right.
Hence the name.
Yeah, breacher. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, and then we got one more. Which is basically a reactive embark stratagem. People are probably most familiar with that from Tau, where like if your unit is charged, you can reactively embark into a transport that is within 3 inches. So again, decent, although again, like for the most part, AdMech doesn't have units that are looking to do this. They don't have that jump in and out transport meta that some people do. I can understand that this is meant to kind of synergize with the we just disembarked from a stratagem and get +1 to wound stratagem, or disembarked from a transport and get +1 to wound stratagem. Obviously, those two can work pretty well together. Again, how often do you find a unit that it's worth spending that 2 CP on? I don't know.
Have you noticed the extra hoop, though?
Well,
so the +1 to wound is your opponents on the objective, and you get +1 to wound them?
Yes.
This one, your unit that's re-embarking has to be
on the objective. Yes. So you're actually looking at 3 CP because you want to combo this with your other one to get a second acquisition marker. Yeah, it's
it could have been a neat combo.
There's a lot of combos in here. It's the same with some of the enhancements. Like there genuinely is like this thing where it's like, wow, that is a objectively strong rule, and then what they make you do to get it is like, what? Like this is basically the 3rd or 4th most relevant opinion or ability on any Eldar datasheet, and yet it is the central ability of this convoluted stratagem.
Yeah. Let's go over the enhancements, and I'll mention like my one main thought about how this all weaves together.
Okay, so we have Magos for a chance to get a 50-50 4-up chance to gain 1 CP. This is interesting specifically because it is the only like real CP generation in the entire book. You have to have the dude on your acquisition marker. He does have to roll a 4-up. Obviously, there is a billion squads in this book that have the data tethers where you can regain a spent CP on a 5-up.
Yep.
This one is actual generation though, and I don't think there's anywhere else in this book that you can do
no other generation apart from inquisitorial goodness.
Yeah, you'd have to be ally.
I will say the data tethers, like that's another something we can get to once we're done all the detachments. Some of them make good use of that.
They do. It's just the 5-up. It's first up.
Yeah.
It's 5-up. The other thing is you have to spend to make.
You have to spend it.
Whereas with generation, you don't. You know.
Stockpile.
Yes. You have a very strong stratagem in Genador, which gives you give to a tech priest, and he gives his entire squad a 4-up invul. Again, on the acquisition marker, though. You have a very similar ability for add +1 to your hit roll. Again, on a tech priest who is on an objective or your acquisition marker. Or
this one's different.
When you target the enemy on an acquisition marker.
Yeah.
And then finally you have a semi sort of Eldar ability to change a hit, wound, or saving throw to an unmodified 6. While the bearer is leading a unit that is within range of your acquisition marker. Again, you can definitely see why Kieren said earlier, like you basically can just write down -1 CP every single turn to get a second acquisition marker because you desperately need it. I feel in some ways that what really one very easy swap in this particular detachment to make it more viable would be to move the second acquisition marker ability to an enhancement. And then you're not having to worry about spending CP for it.
That's an interesting thought, because my issue with this detachment, so there's a bunch. I'll start with the one which is actually I actually like all the enhancements so much that the idea of adding a fifth is actually, it somewhat bothers me, because they're all so good. Now it's just I want them all, and having to pick that one as basically an auto take would prevent me from taking one of the other good ones. And even the one that's just, change a dice roll to a 6. It's cheap.
Yeah.
And you have dev wound models, characters that do dev wounds. That's good. That's totally fine. You have stuff with invulns. 6s are great for invulns, as all the Sisters players can say.
Absolutely.
The biggest thing for this one, for me, is they decided to introduce this mechanic around your acquisition markers. Cool, interesting. Reroll 1s is good. Reroll hits would be better, but then you'd run into counter breacher synergy, which is, I think, needed. But it is what it is. The thing that gets me with this one, and what's come out in my games, has been needing some abilities to be on, like you have to be on an objective to get it, and some needing your opponent to be on it.
Yes.
Because the situation where you're on an objective, shooting at someone on another objective, and being able to use all these strats and enhancements to their max capability is not that off. Like, it doesn't come up that way. And frankly, part of the whole acquisition rule is you only need one or the other to be true. Yes. If you're on it shooting out, you get rerolls, and if your opponent's on it, you get rerolls against them.
Yep.
So the fact that all of these abilities also then basically say, no, we actually want you on one and them on one, it really bothers me, because they had cool idea.
Yes.
Very potentially neat implementation. I do think if it was implemented better without all these hoops, this would be your all-comers list, and it would do it very well. It wouldn't do the board control thing as well, but this would turn into the list that plays like 9th Ed AdMech.
Yep.
And you know what? It is inspired by 9th Ed AdMech.
Yep.
Based on the enhancement names and some of the abilities, but it's just a little bit off. You're gonna have breachers. You're gonna have some Skitarii. You're gonna have some vehicles. You can run Electro Priests and Dune Riders here. Thinking about it now, Transvector in here, this is probably where I use it, which once again fits into kind of how that 9th Ed AdMech list played.
Yeah.
But it's just so rough to play.
Yeah, I think another issue with the acquisition marker in general, not in general, sorry, but with some of the way that it synergizes with these abilities, is that this encourages a highly choreographed playstyle. And I think that that's competitively problematic, because the more things that your opponent can guarantee they know you're going to do, or that you have to do, the harder it is for you to play successfully. And that's kind of the part of where that dichotomy, like you're getting at, of you have to be here and you need them to be there, becomes really problematic. This is also one of those armies, and detachments. I would compare this detachment to how Custodes and Thousand Sons play a lot too. Yeah.
The fact that your damage's lethality goes up so much when your opponent's on an objective in those armies.
Yeah.
When you're playing people who are newer to 10, they're not super cutthroat competitive players trying to win events. Like,
not AdMech players.
They'll put their units on objectives and they'll feel good about it. And then you'll sit there and go, ha, like, I'm actually really good now.
Yeah.
Against really experienced players, like, here's my chaff unit.
Yep. Yep.
We're gonna have a lower scoring game, but like, you're not gonna be the benefactor here, because you're not getting most of your rules anymore.
Well, it's going to be even worse. They're going to try to play you into it's like, you want to use your army rules? Okay, well, I'm going to look for ways to make that you screw yourself over by trying to play that. Like, go ahead, stay there, get your rerolls
from your home objective.
Yep.
So you're not getting any rerolls to win, because I'm not on another objective unless I'm a chaff unit hiding behind a building or something. Or, I will specifically put all my stuff not on an objective and roll it somewhere where I'm going to fire at your stuff before it gets to where it needs to stage, right? It's a really neat detachment. It was a bit of a nightmare to play, just like in 9th, but I actually enjoyed that nightmare quite a bit. So this brought me back. I had some good nostalgia here. very rough detachment. I do want to point out one thing about the strats too. The very good, situationally, +1 to wound strat is also 2 CP.
Ah, yes. This is also a thing.
So the strat that you would sit there and go, okay, I'll make another objective with the Infil Slave Skull, be my acquisition, and then I'll do this cool thing with the transports. Well, you can't. That's 3 CP. You're not getting more than 3 CP around.
Yeah.
You can generate here.
Yep.
So maybe this is a thing where, on turn 3 you start doing it.
That's but how often is it worth it,
Yeah. It's just not. So.
Well, but it is, like we said, probably one that, this is kind of what going back to the start of the cast here, where I said there are some things that only need a few changes where they could maybe pop off. Again, we don't know. It's hard to tell with GW nowadays because things that I would never think they would do changes-wise, they have done a few times in 10th. So
if they jump in and ever do like detachment updates for codexes in a meaningful way, and the Drakari detachment being an example of here's a new one in the meantime, this would be like go back and rewrite a book's detachment. This detachment, I like it. I would be a bit concerned it would just be too good over all the others. Because I will say, in terms of strength, Radzone and this one feel very comparable to me.
Yeah.
I think Radzone actually has a theme that it tries to play. It's just not super effective when you're trying to battle shock people.
Yes.
This one just does everything. Like, it lets you run a list with a Dune Crawler, Dune Rider, Breachers, Skitarii, Dragoons, Ballistari, Tech Priests, infantry units, like cavalry.
Yep.
It runs every unit in the book.
Yeah, it's broad.
Right? Which is really exciting, but yeah, it just doesn't come together.
Speaking of, there is another detachment we have where things actually kind of do come together. Sometimes in ways that, people maybe didn't expect. And that is the last one of the book, the Cohort Cybernetica. This is low-key become my favorite. Not necessarily from a power standpoint, although I do think it is powerful. But just from, being fun to play and fun to play against. Which AdMech do have a history, not even just in 10th, of not necessarily being fun to play against.
I think
but this is
really good closing thoughts there.
Yeah.
Fun.
No fun. That's not the AdMech way. Cohort Cybernetica, I know you must have gotten at least 10 or 15 games in.
Yeah, this is my second most played. So this one, I hit 14 games with this one.
Okay.
It's quite fun. So fun to play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the vehicle detachment, ostensibly. That's where a lot of your focus is going to be. The detachment rule is the most powerful in the entire book. It gives one unit in your army's rule. That's the Castellan robots.
It gives the character the rule too, who has to join a unit of robots.
That's true. He does have to. Great. You are not wrong. I misspoke. That is not what you take this detachment for. But the good news is there's lots of other good things in here, most of which are, again, focused around vehicles. So, Kieren, I'm gonna put you on the spot. I don't even want to give you a top 3. Give me a top 2. What is the top 2 units to use in this detachment?
Okay, so top 2, Dragoons.
Our
top 1. They are lovely. They are fast.
S-tier.
They do lots. They are great. And robots, I actually think, are up there.
So this is the Walker detachment, even. It's not even vehicle.
It's the Walker detachment. You bet. And I will say, the detachment rule being this, robots get the army rule. It'd be great if robots just got the army rule. Because what I will say is this is a meaningful benefit.
Oh, sure.
I've noticed it in games.
Yeah.
And gone, this would make me take robots. Maybe. In other areas. Can you imagine if there was an actual detachment rule beyond that here?
Yeah, no doubt, right?
I'm fine with the weak one. Give me a weak one.
I think that was literally my comment to you in one of the games I played against you. It was like, wow, if this had an actual detachment rule, just think about it. This would be good,
right? And I played 2 games with this, 3 games with this against 2 games against your Wraith list, your Necron Wraith Canoptic Court list, and then 1 game against Nico, and I felt good in all of those games.
Yeah.
Which and a lot of that was due to the robots.
Yeah. Well, and they're the
able
one.
to get mid-board quick.
Yeah.
Because of the advance, and still provides some incidental shooting, and you know, I did occasionally actually use the heavy army rule to get heavy weapons and armor of contempt against shooting in my deployment zone. I used it in this army. Sometimes I would get midfield with a lot of tanks. I did use it against you, I think, in both games.
I was going to say, I think you used it
midfield,
more.
and on turn 3 or 4,
yeah,
you're sitting there going, "Is there anything left in my opponent's deployment zone?"
Yeah.
It's a Doomstalker on the back that will just load off itself.
Yeah.
I'll
honestly,
take heavy. My tank will sit in combat and just pew pew. You know,
this one actually plays the Conqueror Doctrina better than quite a few of the other ones do.
Yeah.
The strat list is fairly, for the most part, very simple and straightforward strats. They're not necessarily tricksy things that are, this weird combo, but they're all very, very handy. Not all, but they're all mostly very handy. We have a strat for +3 to your move and +1 to your advance and charge. We already mentioned Dragoons.
Yeah.
But it's not just. Robots. Yeah, I was going to say robots too. Even occasionally like a Dune Crawler or something that you just need to get somewhere. We got ballistic seal, the ability to give a unit ballistic seal 3+, which is sadly an upgrade for most mechanical units, and also ignores cover. Because it is 2 bonuses and 1 for 1 CP, that's pretty good. It does come with a rider that you have to target a specific unit on an objective. But that's actually, like, because it's any objective, like, you're probably lining that up ahead of time, so...
Yeah, this one, I misplayed it against Ryan, like, my 3rd game with this attachment. And it was very useful. This one's still great, because one of the things AdMech does well is, as much as we talked about earlier, like, if you have breachers, you want to go second. If you don't have breachers, you want to go first. I think this is one of those detachments that loves going first.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, if your opponent, based on their deployment zone, what the mission is, what the setup is, has anything valuable on their deployment, on their objective turn 1, and you can run up, my choice use for this is 3 Ballistari.
Yeah.
And you run up 3 Ballistari and you say, hey, I actually hit on 3s with these 3 twin-linked sustain 1 hits, AP 4, ignore cover, last cannons.
Yeah. Yep.
A lot of stuff doesn't like that.
Yeah. All those hypercrypt Necrons are going, oh, there goes my monolith.
Yeah. And we talked about it a bit with the last detachment, but this is a detachment where the only unit that isn't refunding you CP when you use a stratagem on it is the robots.
Yeah, because everything else has a data tether.
And I know we talked about the distinction between generation and having to spend to gain.
Yep.
There was a lot, like, in every game I played with this detachment, there was at least 1 to 2, maybe even 3 command phases where I had a couple things I wanted to do, and I literally had the fun, we're going to talk about fun, I had the fun choice of picking which strat to use first.
Yep.
Hoping I got the generation to then maybe allow me this 3rd thing to do something that I didn't need to do, but it would have been nice. And that was a bit of a lottery, but it was fun.
But
and it gave me some choice around the ordering that I felt made a difference, right? Which is kind of a unique thing about these stratagems, because to point out to everyone, the when is your command phase for all 6.
Yep.
Which is very refreshing.
Yeah, for sure. Because, like you said, there is sometimes themes in this book that kind of run through a detachment. Because they are all timed that way, it actually does work out to be a pretty good thing, because, like you said, your generation then is going to happen right away, and you're going to be able to plan out your turn. We do have a few more in here. One that is actually, like... I'm going to skip ahead here. One that just always catches my eye because I laugh about it. It's again going back to that balancing being done maybe a little earlier in the edition. But there is a 1 CP strat in here that allows you to both A, fall back and shoot, and B, also ignore all modifiers. And it's funny to me because in any new book, those are easily 2 different 1 CP abilities. And this is both in one. And I always love that because it's hilariously overpowered, even though it's not, because it actually can't be used on a unit that is too wildly powerful. We do have a strat which you've used to endlessly good ability, the reroll strat. So it's you target a unit, a vehicle, and you get reroll hits if they're below starting, and reroll wounds if they're below half. Okay.
So the below starting is the key thing.
Yeah.
I wish there was low key. I mean, actually, we'll get into this. There is a way to self-inflict some damage in this book, in this detachment, which I actually think is maybe the key to this. Because I will say, oftentimes when I've gotten this stratagem to go off, it a lot of the times it's been because my opponent has shot something without fully realizing the implications of just chipping something down in this list. Which is, don't chip something down in this list unless you're going to kill it. Because if it is just a full battle tank sitting there, or a dune crawler, with the eradication laser thing, beamer thing, with sustained hits C3. You know, I've had these things pop off and shoot and get 10 or 12 hits.
Yeah, with like a pretty scary profile.
Damage with rerolls to wounds, and that's nutty.
Well, and you
on
do,
TP, and it works on Overwatch because it lasts until
it's true
your next command phase.
The thing is, like, because you are playing a vehicle heavy army, like, you do, like, the reality is your opponent, it's easy to say don't chip stuff, but the reality of playing any vehicle heavy army is that you can't make it that clean. You just can't. You're always going to have to just deal with the reality that you're going to have to soften something up one turn and finish it the next. And honestly, the two things that play pretty well into this are, one, that you're going to also support this army with some of the engine seers, who of course can regenerate wounds. You're not necessarily doing, you do want your units damaged, but it's handy because you know that some damage is almost certainly just a positive, because if you're worried about dying, you can do some repairs. Second off, you have another one of the stratagems that's a little further on here, which has to be in your opponent's mind when they're shooting at you, which is that you have an on-demand 6+ feel no pain, which again on a vehicle actually is oftentimes very relevant to cutting that line in between dead and alive on a few wounds, which then gave them full rerolls. Right.
Now, in terms of on demand, on demand in your command phase.
Well, it's command phase, but it's a 1 CP thing though.
Loading
and of course,
this on robots is really good.
Yeah.
And the engine seers changed in the AdMech book compared to the others, where they give a 5-up feel no pain to vehicles, not a 4-up invuln.
Yes.
So you can be in situations where, you're right, Scott. Like you have a unit of robots on a 6-up feel no pain, and then you have 2 or 3 battle tanks with 5-up feel no pains. And yes, you know what? You might think you're going to go in and kill that target, and then it survives at 3 wounds left.
Yeah.
The engine seer rolls up, gives it an extra wound, and then you sit there and go, I got full rerolls to hit and wound, and I'm ignoring modifiers. So I'm not getting my -1 to hit, and I'm heavy.
Yep.
And I just, my 140 point take that has 500 points of support goes nuts.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
That's fun. It's fun though. It's fun.
When you put it that way.
I know, like I'm being somewhat facetious, but I actually do think this detachment is probably one of the most fun, and it plays very well.
It does.
It plays the skew well. You do have to worry about giving up 40 points on secondaries. So I've waffled between running 3 and 4 characters, and I actually feel like that's a distinction that's kind of important here. Mm-hmm. Is giving up 12 on Assassinate isn't as bad. Yeah. Giving up 16 or 20 on Assassinate and
makes your opponent just want to play fixed.
Is tough.
Yeah.
But yeah, amazing strats. You do, the last one here is you do have the ability to get both army rule benefits on one unit. I will say this crops up a lot in AdMech in a number of other places.
Yeah.
At least, sorry, one other detachment.
Yeah. But it gets used. Yeah.
It gets used, and I think there's an enhancement for it in the Hunter cohort.
Yeah.
It's weird getting Assault and Heavy as like, this is a bonus, when really all they're giving you is either Armor of Contempt for yourself in your own deployment zone or extra AP.
Yeah.
This is actually useful here on just a tank sitting on the deployment zone, like sitting at the front of the line turn 1.
Yep.
And once again, this list wants to go first.
Sure. Yeah.
And you go first, and you basically say, this Dune Crawler, I deployed on the line with good line of sight. Scotty, you better not deploy anything that doesn't have an invuln here.
Yeah.
Because I will gladly take heavy AP 5 neuron laser shots at you. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll leave this tank in the open because it's just inefficient to kill.
Well, that's just it, and that's not even not failing to even mention one of the most important keys to that stratagem, and a distinct part of that 500 points of support, which will be that one of these characters is going to undoubtedly be rocking the enhancement for zeroing out a damage, like Magnus. An impossible robe, I believe, was the original ability, something like that. Anyhow, but that obviously, knowing that there is that ability to blank a damage roll as well on a vehicle once a turn, means that, again, your opponent cannot bank on just killing stuff, and gives the AdMech player a little bit more of that control to be like, yeah, I'm going to get a unit beat up a little bit here on purpose, to trigger off this, incredibly powerful ability to get full rerolls, or at least lots of rerolls, on units, which a couple of which are genuinely scary, if they have those rerolls. So
this is where the lethality of breachers coming from those rerolls can be replicated here, and it can be replicated well. And you're taking enough vehicles that, similar to Votan when they're running a bunch of Sagittars or Hecatons, like your conversion beamers might not go off every turn,
but they will eventually.
When they do, it's fun. And when you're rolling 6 shots instead of 2 shots, it matters. So yeah, you have a bunch of tanks. They're all rolling dice. Some of them will just be like, I roll dice. All right, 0 saves. And your opponent looks at you and goes, okay.
Yeah.
And then one pops off and they're like, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
Did you kill 20 boys with Feel No Pains and down on the ground with Stubbers? And you're like, yeah, I wounded you on 6s. And they're like, how many shots? How many tanks? And you're just like, well, I shot you with my army.
Yeah.
And you might say killing 20 boys isn't worth it, but you're not killing much back. And this is where that durability of AdMech, the blanking out damage, the Feel No Pain, really adds up.
That's literally what I was just about to say. I'm like, and that's the thing, is that even if this army doesn't kill a lot in a turn, which, having played against it, I know it sometimes doesn't. The thing is, it does. The design of AdMech still comes through on that durability side. They are just as likely to blank you on damage, and then the board state hasn't changed, and you just re-rack, do it again on turn 2 or 3 or 4, and that's just how it plays. And it does still play, like, I feel like the cohort still does play fairly aggressively, even as it does have more shooting pieces than some other AdMech armies do. But it still wants to get pretty aggressive, especially with some of its big hulls, or big based hulls, I should say, because a lot of them are just, dragoons on gigantic bases. But yeah, it's a very fun army. It is, I genuinely believe, competitively viable, even if it's not necessarily tippy top right now. Again, who knows? Maybe there's a change or two down the line that get that going. We'll see.
Yeah, I really do think this one actually has a lot of play. I ran it a lot. I think 12 of those games were with 3 Scorpius tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Man. 20 to 30 points off them, and I'm feeling ecstatic about this list.
One unit that could do with some points drops. That's fair.
Yeah.
Actually, 2. There's Castellans too. Castellans too, yeah.
And if those units got points drops, and even if you got, say, 100 points in this list, then you skim something else.
Yeah.
Maybe a single Ballistari or something, and suddenly you have 2 units of deep striking Traxi, and you can play secondaries far better. And this list is just like really good.
Yeah.
It does play askew. Sure. I think one thing that's interesting about all these detachments, kind of moving into the in review, is there's actually some very neat skews that do have sub themes.
Yep.
With very specific small groups of models.
Yeah.
That in a team tournament context would be very interesting. In a solo context are just very hard to pull off. Like, you have awful matchups. And great matchups.
Yeah. Those are the RTT slayers. You take them to 3 games and hope for the best.
I think terrain's also a big determination here. So, Cybernetica, giant tanks that actually want to move up the board. Some terrain types work for that, some don't.
Yeah.
Explorer maniple. Where are your objectives in relation to what kind of terrain? Do you have lines of sight? Very good on some terrain, very bad on others.
Go play on that UKC terrain and cry.
The priests. Put me on that UKTC terrain. That's really great terrain for that army.
Yeah.
Just your dune crawlers are zooming up, and then your infantry are just sitting behind buildings having a great time with fights first. That's good.
Yeah.
The other, and then, Rad Zone and Hunter Cohort, bodies. Yes. Bodies moving up the board, but I need room for Dragoons in both of those armies.
You do.
And, it's really important to how those units work. And
so know your local meta. Actually, that's not even entirely fair, because obviously, even within a local context, you can have dramatically different terrain from one event to another. But it is an army that knowing planning for a given event is maybe more important than some others, because AdMech, partially just because of where they are in the power spectrum, but also somewhat by design, they definitely do have more considerations about what else is out there that they're going to run into, which is fine. I actually don't hate that. I wish, to be honest with you, that was more of a thing across many other armies. The game tends to be healthier when it is, even as I also don't like rock paper scissors Warhammer.
It keeps things fresh, though, right? Like if you're an AdMech player who owns 3,000 Canadian dollars worth of models,
it's only 1,500 points.
Yeah, you can play a lot of different lists that do different things and play into different metas, different terrain steps, cover different matchups in a team context. I will say, this is what I hoped for in the detachment system.
Yeah.
I wanted something that would let an army flex this many different ways. Just, unfortunately, it's really hard to balance that.
It is.
Consistent, right?
You want the flex to be rewarding too, though, and it's not always, right?
Yeah, and you don't necessarily want an army to do all things well, right? Except for maybe Space Marines, for obvious reasons. Sorry, you want to be able to have combat Space Marines and shooting Space Marines, but they always have that sub-theme of it's a Space Marine body, right?
Yeah.
The sub-theme here is you're always cheap save and wounds 2 points.
Yeah.
And that's neat.
It's not a good archetype, though.
No,
it's not a good way to build a book. Not as an identity. And so, right now, it feels like that is AdMech's identity.
I would hard agree. The only I've won games with breachers from a lethality perspective.
Yeah.
Basically every other game I play with AdMech, when I win, it's because my stuff's hard to kill. You put it in the right spot. You had good shooting priority to take out the things that were threats to your pieces. You positioned in a way to protect yourself because you have a lot of bodies. It's just not. It's a very different way to have a Codex run.
Yeah.
And play it successfully over time. I will say it's also one of those armies that the base sizes are so big.
So brutal.
It's very hard to hide your army. And going back to the kind of the comparison to some of the 9th edition stuff, in the competitive meta world of just hiding your armies until turn 3, 4, 5, and then coming out and doing your thing, AdMech doesn't have that luxury.
Yeah.
Something will get shot turn 1.
Yep.
Even if you're hiding as much as you can and strat resolving things. So it just needs to play 40k in a way that is somewhat resistant to everyone's first games of 40k, where you deploy in the line and people roll to see who goes first, and you go, oh crap, I think I lost. And you kind of need to be durable to do that.
You do.
And that's where AdMech, it's kind of weird, but you can.
You literally can, yeah. Especially with, as you kind of mentioned earlier, the overall lethality of 10th was supposed to be down, and it kind of was and it wasn't to the start of the edition, but over time, a couple data slates, it genuinely has dropped.
Yep.
So...
And I think that's putting AdMech in a better and better place.
Yeah.
I won't speak to, stats checking kind of tournament results, but being able to deploy and play a game after going second against an army that's pure shooting.
Yeah.
last time I played local guy Mike here with his Space Marine tank list, I couldn't see him turn 1. He popped out with 3 Lancers and 3 Repulsor Executioners turn 1 and didn't kill a tank.
Well, there you go, right? So,
and 4 up invulns, feel no pains. I guess I didn't have a feel no pain turn 1. Flanking damage, 4 up invulns. Having armor of contempt, cover. It's surprisingly durable, right?
Yeah, I've actually been on the other end of it. Like I said, some of our games, and like even knowing the army reasonably well, and knowing the stats and stuff, and doing a bit of the math hammer ahead of time, like, and being aware that I'm like, well, I think things will go like this. Sometimes, like in our games, like I've been momentarily shocked by like, wow, Kieren didn't do crap this turn because all of his casino dice just kind of fell off on him, which happens at AdMech. And you're feeling really good about a turn, and then you just literally return the favor, and suddenly you're like, well, okay.
Yeah. I mean, thinking of one of the games, I had that shooting phase turn 1 that just did nothing, and then I do remember, I think it was the next turn, the shooting phase did nothing again.
Yep.
But then I think I picked up a unit of Wraiths with the robots in combat. Just casually, one of the units that's was dominating everyone that tournament. It's interesting.
AdMech are an army that, to be fair, this is not new, but with the shift to the 4+ weapon skills and ballistic skills a lot, very, very, very much a gambler's army, where things can absolutely swing on you either way, within a turn or so. Which most of us hate. Although, I don't know. Maybe it's helping balance. I don't know.
I don't know how you want to close this, and what your true closing thoughts are. I think mine about AdMech has to do with fun.
Yep.
Because by far, like, the board positioning competitive way to play falls under that Guitari Hunter cohort world umbrella. I think that's what's doing well tournament results wise.
It's not fun.
I think you really have to have a certain mentality to play that and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And then doubly so, your opponent.
Yep.
It's not something I wish on my opponent.
No. It's not fun.
Rad Zone, okay, we're doing more battle shocky things, that's kind of cool. It's not super fun to deal with. Like, I'm just doing that same thing, but asking you to take battle shocks and doing less damage and being less survivable. You get into the Datasom and the Cybernetica, and that's the reason I like those 2 detachments so much is because I think they are both fun.
Yeah.
There's choices for you to make around stratagems that aren't just click button repeatedly.
They're meaningful.
Who and what you do and put those buffs on is important.
Yep.
Positioning is important because you're not just flooding the board with cheap models. And, I'm talking 60 Electric Priest is a lot of models. But their positioning is so important because they're combat units.
Yep.
They might have fights first. You want to use heroic intervention. How you weave your units together, where you put your tech priests in the units matters.
Yes.
And that is very engaging for me. And frankly, my opponent isn't just looking at me, say, the only thing I'm doing this game is mashing things up the board, and I'm asking you to roll buckets of dice.
Sometimes for no reason.
My shooting phase is rolling hundreds of dice for last gun shots.
Yep.
Without all the flavor that those guard lists actually have when they do that to you.
Yep. Or the synergy. To be honest with you. So
I think they nailed aspects of this book, and the issue is what they were going for. I just don't think is fun.
Yeah,
and I think that's my main complaint. I know a lot of people didn't like the Ninth Ed book because it was so Byzantinian to understand, and you had to trust your opponent blindly.
Yes,
to know what they were doing. But speaking from the player perspective, there was a lot to do, and at least it was fun for me. And sometimes my opponent had fun in watching me try to do well.
Yeah.
It was
entertaining.
In this book, there's just things that are not fun to watch.
No. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I kind of agree. I think that this book was a pretty legitimate take by the writers to try to preserve some of the uniqueness of the 9th edition Codex. Because there's, like, after a year or more of hardcore playing that book, I was still occasionally finding and fine-tuning some things, thinking, actually, that's maybe a thing to go with there. And it was not a big book. Okay? But the thing is that 9th edition book did have things that worked. And so often in this book, you're so close to working, and just then it just falls off. And part of that actually isn't even the book's fault, it's 10th edition. And 10th edition isn't bad, it's just changed from the way things were in 9th. And, you know, I do appreciate what they were trying to do. But, you know, I think we're still missing the mark a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with you overall.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some points decreases to those 2 units that we talked about. I'm gonna say 3 for maybe Call. I'll toss Call into the bucket of the battle line tank, the robots, and Call.
Yeah.
But in terms of other things, it is just like, can someone take a little Sharpie and go through these detachments and either add a detachment rule?
Yeah. Or just little edits.
Explorator Maniple, oh man. Even if it was just pick one. Opponent on objective or you on objective, and just make it all consistent. Even that I would put more credence to.
Honestly,
the red zone things. Can you give me any command phase for 1 or 2 of these?
Yep.
Or my opponent's command phase?
Yeah.
Like any of that.
It's funny you mention a Sharpie, because I think there's a lot of places where literally just blacking out a few words here and there would do the trick.
Explorator, like, you could actually make a very good detachment without any additions.
Yep. You just
subtractions.
Yep.
Right?
Minus here, minus there, minus there. Yep.
And then lastly, I think it's very counterintuitive for most books to not have army rules on various units.
Yes.
And then also the army rule only benefiting shooting. Like,
yes.
I like how, when we were talking about Red Zone, I like the point about it being overly complex on purpose.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is just extremely limiting in a way that is not additive to the fun.
Well,
you know, if the army rule even had, go back to what you had before.
Yeah.
Sorry, not exactly, but have an army rule that does shooting or combat things.
Yeah.
And either give some choice, or say some units get this one, some units get this one.
Yeah.
Not every unit gets this one, but only half of them can use it effectively.
Yeah.
And then you have a half of your book that doesn't have this, even as a consideration.
Yep.
There's just some missed marks there, right?
Yep.
And it's funny because the Tyranid book did this so well. In contrast, right? Like, the Vanguard detachment and what's in there is thematic, it's interesting, and impactful. And same thing for other, it's just...
Yep. And that's kind of how AdMech players have been feeling for the last few months before this Codex review, in case anyone was wondering. This is also part of the reason I always like to mention it every cast, why we do these Codex reviews so late compared to a lot of places, because I feel like having this context to add is actually really good for the conversation. What can I say? Thank you so much, Kieren, for coming out tonight.
Thanks, man.
We'll wrap things up here. I do have a few little closing notes. I do, as always, cannot really thank our few subscribers enough here. Frederick, Dustin, Chris, and Tyler. Thank you so much, guys. I know it's not a ton, but your guys' contributions literally help make things like tonight possible. It costs us over $50,000 to have Kieren here tonight. So, like, everybody who's donating, yes, we had to give him 2 boxes of Skitarii to be here tonight. So it does help a lot. It goes a long, long way. We always appreciate you guys. We also do want to make sure that we're touching base on all of our upcoming events. Actually, just in, I want to say 3 weeks, we have Adepticant. Kieren, are you playing an Adepticant?
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe there'll be 60 Electro Priests there.
Maybe, yeah. So that'll be coming up. It is currently sold out, but if you are still interested, feel free to hop on the wait list. It'll be March 23rd, I want to say. And then we do have a new event coming up in April for you Age of Sigmar folks on April 1st or 21st, Mayhem in the Mortal Realms. So there's still space in that if you guys want to hop on that. A little one-day AOS RTT. And then as we kind of move into May and then June, eventually we'll be getting to the GamesCon narrative event. So feel free to go check out those links on our page and, come out and see folks have the games and maybe even get to watch Kieren play some AdMech live, depending on his mood that day. He is a man of many hats, so.
True. I've worn the AdMech hat a lot, though.
You have.
And it's nice. It's important to change things up every once in a while.
It is still genuinely a fun army. It's like the army itself. That's maybe one thing we don't touch on enough, is that the army itself is fun, which I think is why some of the detachments that are less fun or just have less fun playstyles is so stark. Is like, for me, that's the thing about AdMech, all the way back to 7th when they first came out, is that I always just had so much damn fun playing them. So like if I'm playing a game with AdMech, even if I'm getting my butt kicked and I'm not having much fun, or I think that there's something about this that just doesn't seem that fun, that really is like a stark realization. So it kind of sucks to have that in the book right now, especially in some places which are, objectively strong in the meta per se, because that's just a way that people tend to gravitate towards. But again, like we said, this book, more than some of the other ones out there, some of what it needs is very small, and more importantly, GW has even specifically said that maybe some of it's not working the way they intend. Who knows what might happen.
Yeah, no, that'll be exciting. We'll see what comes. I don't think they're going to lower the price of models.
No.
So when they say stuff's not working as intended,
I think that's rules.
I think that's probably rules.
So we'll see. And when it does, I'm sure we'll have a catch-up episode if suddenly AdMech soars back into everybody's naughty book. So once again, thank you for coming out tonight, Kieren. Very much appreciate it. And we'll catch you guys all in the next one.
Did you plug the Patreon? We need to plug the Patreon.